Deliver Us from Evil is a documentary about child abuse in the Catholic Church, specifically the abuse of Oliver O'Grady, an Irish-born priest who for over 20 years abused countless victims as he posed as a man of God in Northern California. Countless because, according to this film, about 80% of sexual abuse victims never come forward and suffer their pain in silence. This movie won first place in the documentary category of the Los Angeles Film Festival and also reignited attention to sexual abuse by priests, a topic which the church has been desperately trying to sweep under the rug. Amy Berg is the director, writer, and producer of this film, her first feature after doing specials for CBS. Her news work led her to cover the abuse scandal and eventually to make this powerful and affecting film. Tell me about some of the abuses that Father O'Grady committed. How many children did he hurt over how long a period of time?
Well, we'll never really know exactly how many because the statistics are for people who have been sexually abused. Generally, they don't report. 80% of people don't report sexual abuse. But Oliver is admitted to about 25. The lawyers that have tried cases against him have said it's more in the hundreds. They thought it's at least 100. And when I spoke to the director of the Survivors Network for Those Abused by Priests, which is the organization that supports victims of clergy abuse and provides resources and statistics, he said that the general MO for a clergy abuse victim is that if someone else was abused by the same priest and they come out, then that victim probably won't report because they'll feel like at least the priest's name is out there and at least there's a report that he was an abuser. But it's generally so difficult for a clergy abuse survivor to report that they were abused. There's so much shame involved, and there's so much more than just sexual abuse in general. It's a whole nother level, which is something I tried to explore in the film.
Can you tell me a little about the Survivors Network?
The Survivors Network it's called SNAP Network, and their website is snapnetwork.org, and it's basically an organization made up of tens of thousands of people, different chapters in most cities, and it's a support group. It's a therapy / resource / historical fact. The SNAP Network's goal is to educate the public about priests that have molested. They provide statistics and resources for victims and the media, and they are, I know, growing in numbers.
What are some of the statistics that they have in terms of how many cases of abuse there have been in the United States?
The statistic that I got from them was that there have been at least 100,000 people who have come forward in the United States alone. And in terms of priests, I think that the number was 3,500 priests in America have been named as molesters or accused of molesting children. Those are the main statistics. I'm sure there are some others if you need.
What were some of the consequences that Oliver O'Grady faced from the church from this abuse?
Well, the problem is that he didn't face any consequences. He, early in his career, confessed to abusing children, and instead of taking him out of ministry, he was moved from parish to parish. And he says a number of times to me, and this is in the film, he says, I wish someone would have taken me out of office. I wish somebody would have stopped me because it was getting out of control for him. And he acknowledges that pedophilia, the sexual abuse of children in the church, to him it was a disease. It's an addiction, and it was something that was out of control for him.
So he was moved instead of being taken from the church, taken from his position. How many times was he moved?
He was moved about 5 times in his career, possibly more, but these are just the main cities that he hit.
And it wasn't very far, was it?
No, sometimes 30, 40, 50 miles away. I think 50 was the furthest.
Why do you think the church chose to just move the problem rather than take care of it and nip it in the bud?
Well, the experts that I've spoken to in the process of making this film say that the code of secrecy is very, very important in the church, and there were internal directives from the top down to the bishops and priests saying that this is a problem that we will deal with ourselves. If you hear this report, you keep it here and you take care of it this way instead of going to local authorities. So when I started making this documentary, there had been no case that the church had independently prosecuted on their own. There were no cases of priests that they found out that were abusers that they took out of office. The only time they were ever taken out of office is, number one, if they were arrested and tried, or number two, the media found out about it and it was publicized. So that's the wrong response. That's not the right people to be responding to. They should have been responding to their parishioners, their parents, of the children who were being abused, but they chose to not do that.
In this movie, you touch upon a concept called, and forgive me if I pronounce this wrong, bella figure. Can you tell me what that means?
It's bella figure is how I think that's how you say it in the Italian voice. It means good image, and it's basically what the church is very focused on, looking good. And in the film, Tom Doyle says that Roger Mahony is very concerned with this. And Roger Mahony is the Cardinal of Los Angeles, and he has hundreds of priests underneath him who have been accused of molesting, and he has been able to maintain his good image and stay in power, even though we saw what happened with Cardinal Law in Boston, and even though the district attorney has been fighting for 4 years to try to get documents.
In a October 7th New York Times article, front page, it's all about your movie and some of the reignited interest that there has been in prosecuting Cardinal Mahony. What's the latest on that? Has there been any sort of criminal procedures taken?
Well, like I said, the Deputy District Attorney Bill Hodgman in Los Angeles has been waiting 4 years for documents from the courts because, from the church, actually. The court has ordered the church to turn documents over, and the church has repeatedly appealed every decision that has come down. And so finally, the highest court in the land insisted that the documents get turned over, so they've received the documents. That timed with the Los Angeles Film Festival, the pending release of the film, there is a lot of attention on this issue, which it hasn't been in the news lately. So it's been exciting, obviously, for them that there are accusations coming out. There's a public image issue coming out, but their investigation has been ongoing for 4 years. So it's just gotten to the point where there is a grand jury investigation happening in Los Angeles right now, and they are trying to connect Mahony to what he knew in the courts. So it'll be very interesting because a cardinal has never been punished in the criminal justice system to date for covering up priest abuse, and Cardinal Mahony has more priests under him than anybody else that have done this. So there's real interest in prosecuting him.
What was the eventual consequences of Cardinal Law with his cover-up?
Well, it was more of a call to action from the citizens of Boston. It was parishioners that didn't want this kind of shame on their church, and the Boston Globe did an amazing job in investigating it. It came out, the documents came out right away, and it was obvious that Bernard Law knew what was going on. He moved priests, some of the worst pedophiles in history, around just to avoid public scrutiny, avoid any kind of concessions from the church, and so he was forced to resign from Boston. Well, he was basically promoted. If you go look and see where he is right now, he's head of one of the largest churches in Rome. So the people of Boston are a little bit offended that essentially he was kicked upstairs, but he did go away, and I think that's probably what they needed.
How is the situation in LA very different than Boston?
Somehow, Cardinal Mahony is one of the most politically connected figures in Los Angeles, and he's basically been able to get through this. I think people know, because they've heard about it repeatedly over the past 4 years, people know that there have been a lot of priests in Los Angeles under him that have done terrible things, and there's one priest who's in jail right now, and there are a couple of trials upcoming that name Cardinal Mahony, but for some reason he's been able to pass through unscathed. I think he's just a very politically connected man.
Just how many civil trials are in California right now concerning church pedophilia?
We had the number 556 in the film. However, I've been told yesterday by Tom Doyle, who's in the film, actively working on cases, that there are between 600 and 800 cases pending currently. Who
is Tom Doyle, and what's his role exactly?
Tom Doyle is he is a father. He is a Catholic priest, actually, who in 1985 he was working for the Vatican Embassy Office, and he wrote a report because he was noticing a number of cases coming through his office of pedophilia, child abuse in the church. So he got together with some psychologists, and he did this intensive study that said to the bishops of America, we need you to take a look at this. If we don't do something about this problem, it's going to cost the church over $1 billion. Well, they squelched the report. He was then sent off to Germany to be an Air Force chaplain, and he has been speaking out about the issue, but they've been keeping him as far away from the country as possible to try to keep it quiet. Here we are, flash forward 20 years, we've spent over $1 billion. The church has spent over $1 billion in legal expenses, exactly what he said, and the problem has exploded. So and he works with survivors today. He goes around, he's an expert witness in many trials. He goes around and testifies about canon law because he's an expert in canon law, about the problems that he's seen in the church, and he's one of the most credible people in this whole arena.
There has been some talk that the footage that you shot for your film and the interview you did with Oliver O'Grady could possibly be used to prosecute Mahoney. Is that right?
I haven't heard anything about that. I know that they spoke to the DA's office and said there was some interest in that. I don't know about that. All I know is that the Deputy District Attorney Bill Hodgman is in the film. He's seen the film, and he feels that it's a very important film for the political climate in Los Angeles around these trials. What they're going to do with it, I don't know.
In this movie, we see a lot of video deposition of Mahoney, not to put too fine a point on it, but essentially lying. He pretty much shrugs off a lot of questions. When are these depositions from, and what was the circumstances involved in getting them?
Well, there were two separate occasions when he was deposed. The first was in 1997. He was deposed surrounding a civil trial, which was in Stockton, California. And after the civil trial, members of the jury said they didn't believe him, that he had so much conflicting testimony, they didn't believe him. And we found the same thing when we looked at the depositions and read the transcripts. He just is not consistent. Flash forward 7 years, he was deposed in Los Angeles based on the civil cases that are pending in Los Angeles. There were about 30 people in the room. I think 10 different attorneys deposed him, and he couldn't tell the truth. He has a hard time. You can see when he's answering questions, he's trying to remember something. He's definitely kind of not very believable. So he defends the fact that he didn't report anything because it was a bishop-priest privilege. Well, he was a mandatory reporter in California. He is a licensed psychologist, and he was hearing about child abuse, and he wasn't telling authorities. It's unbelievable that this is the man that was in charge of these children, and he wasn't doing anything about it, as if he didn't know there was a problem.
Speaking of Stockton, California, I believe that the police were going to investigate, the Stockton police were going to investigate Oliver O'Grady and the abuse, and then they dropped the investigation. Is that right?
Well, they did investigate it, and they met with the church, and they told him that they told the church officials, Roger Mahoney, Monsignor Kane, these were the two that were in charge at the time. They told them that they believed that Oliver O'Grady was abusing children, but they could not bring the victims to testify because they were too young. In that police report, which we have in the film and it's been used in trials, it specifically says this man should be kept away from children. That was the deal they struck with the church. Less than 2 months later, Oliver O'Grady was promoted to have his own church, and he had 2 churches at this time. And he was molesting again, immediately.
And now he's living essentially scot-free in Ireland after serving a 7-year term. What led to his serving that 7-year sentence?
Well, those same 2 boys that were in the first investigation that you mentioned, the 1984 police report, they grew up and they had the courage. It was 9 years later. They had the courage to come forward and explain what happened. And he was immediately arrested. And then the police department in the county where he was at the time started finding out about his file and that there had been confessions, and he had an employee file that showed that he had been abusing for over 10 years. It was actually 20 years at that time. And so then he was arrested. There was a trial. He was convicted of lewd and lascivious behavior, and he was sentenced to 14 years. He served 7 years, and then he was deported because he was a citizen of Ireland. And after he served 7 years, he was let out for good behavior or something and sent back to Ireland.
You said that the boys came forward 9 years later after their abuse. How long is the statute of limitations in cases like this?
Well, these are the same boys that came forward in 1984, but they were too young at that time. The statute, I believe, is 15 years, but I think that it's been released on clergy abuse victims. And I know that in 2002, California passed a statute that basically said people who were abused can report. It's called a look-back window, and they gave people an extension to report cases for civil discovery, but with criminal cases, I believe it's still 15 years.
Wow. They were children at the time. It's really not at all very fair.
Right, and they say that with clergy abuse, the average age for coming forward is in your 40s, no matter when you were abused, how young you were. That's kind of the average, that people don't usually come out before they're in their 40s.
Wow. You went to Ireland and interviewed Oliver O'Grady. How did you find him as a person, looking back at this abuse?
Well, I went in there and I interviewed him as a journalist. It didn't really matter what I thought of him as a person. I mean, he was a convicted pedophile, and I knew that going in. But he also was someone who admits that he had a terrible disease. He says he wishes they would have taken him out, and he had a story to tell. I mean, I had never seen or heard a priest talk until that point, and I thought it's a very important story because the church wants to keep it all under their roof, and someone like this has a lot of information that we would want to know.
Why was he willing to make this movie with you, help you make it?
He spent 5 months talking to me on the phone, and he decided he trusted me and what I wanted to do, and that's why he did it. I mean, he had a story to tell, and he's been keeping it inside for a long time because when this trial happened, he was meant to testify, and he was told to take the fifth and by the church, and he was basically, he didn't get to tell his story. And he thought of this as an apology at a certain point, but he also thought of it as a confession. And so that's why he told me.
And at a certain point, he tries to write letters to all of his victims, or probably most of his victims, to invite them to meet with him. And what was the reactions of the victims when they got these letters?
Well, it was pretty traumatic for them. I mean, they didn't. Some of them took it seriously, some of them didn't. Those letters proved to be a good thing in one way because there was a man who hadn't come out yet, and I found out about him through making the film, and I was able to talk to him, and he is now able to talk about what happened with him. He felt that nobody would believe him, and the letter served as proof for him, for his mother, and that was a big thing. You know, that was something that really helped this guy. But it was traumatic. I mean, imagine how traumatic it was. And maybe that would be all. Maybe we won't talk about what happens after that because I don't want to give the whole story away.
Wasn't O'Grady himself, as an altar boy, a victim of sexual abuse by priests?
Yes, he was abused when he was actually abused before that when he was even younger at home by his older brother, and then he was abused by priests. He was abused by a stranger once. He told me about a lot of different abuse that happened to him. I mean, he was certainly not a candidate for one-on-one child care. He was certainly not a candidate to be a godfather to a little girl. And these were things that happened because the parishioners trusted him.
Can you tell me about why there has been such a history of child abuse and sexual abuse by priests in the Catholic Church, and a little bit about celibacy in the Catholic Church? When did it start and why?
Well, I believe, now I'm not an expert on the Catholic Church, but I've spoken to the experts, so I want to speak for what they've told me. I believe that the reason the priesthood is full of people like this is, number one, because these people that abuse were abused, and it would tend to offer a solution for someone who had been abused themselves. The church was commonly something they turned to in the characteristics of the personality of someone who is abused. Celibacy, the origin of celibacy, according to all the experts and what I've read, is basically in 4 AD. Priests were married up to that point, and when the priest would die, the widow and his children had a claim to the property, and the church started losing their property to families not staying within the church. So they mandated celibacy at this point. So it's coming from scriptures. This is coming from a purely financial decision. Experts say it's not a healthy condition for someone to be celibate, and how can a man who doesn't have a family be in this type of environment without being sick? Now that might be an extreme viewpoint, because certain priests actually believe that celibacy is okay. It's just how you come to celibacy. Now, someone like Tom Doyle came to celibacy in his 20s. He had a normal childhood. He dated girls. He considered what he was going to do with his life, and instead of going the traditional route of marriage and family, he decided he wanted to be a priest. He didn't have a problem with celibacy. Someone like Oliver O'Grady, who was abused as a child and had a really troubled teenage life, and he was exposed to abuse over and over again as he was growing up. It wasn't the right place for him. This was not an appropriate forum for someone of his condition. So that might explain the different type of priests that come into the priesthood.
There's a mention in this film that because priests become celibate at a young age, and in their monastic schooling, there's very much pressure to push down their sexual urges. They find their psychosexual growth stunted, and therefore on the same psychosexual level of children. Can you elaborate on that at all?
Yes, I mean that generally that applies to boys who were abused. I think that you're talking about when the psychotherapist says their sexual development was arrested in their tracks. I mean, if a young boy is abused at age 7 and then he goes into the priesthood and then he's being groomed into this priestly culture, then that's where his sexual development stops, at age 7. So generally, someone like Oliver, he was attracted to young boys and girls at age 7, 5, 6, 7. So they say that the victims will be around the same age as the predator was when he was abused, if that makes sense.
Sure. There's a brief mention in this film of an office that makes sure priests don't hurt children.
There's the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, which is the organization that actually accepted all the complaints about sexual abuse, but they were not making sure. They were meant to be taking care of this problem, and they didn't do anything about it. And Pope Ratzinger was in charge of that office since the early 80s.
Wow.
And all the reports of sexual abuse in the priesthood came through that organization.
Wow.
And it was called the Holy Office. And this is the same group that Tom Doyle presented his report to, and they didn't do anything about it until it exploded in the media in 2002. And then Pope John Paul at the time, Pope John Paul II, appointed Ratzinger to a new post, which was which was going to be handling all of those claims. That was his direct responsibility, because he had all that experience for 20 years at that point. So I think that's what you mean. I think that what they're saying is the office that was supposed to be protecting children was not protecting children. So I know what you're talking about now.
There's a mention at the end of this film that President Bush granted immunity to the Pope.
Yes.
Can you tell me the details of that?
Well, at the end of 2005, President Bush actually issued a statement saying that the Pope is granted immunity because he was actually asked to be deposed in a case that was pending in Texas. And the reason that they wanted to depose him was because he was the head of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith for over 20 years. And the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith is the organization where all claims of sexual abuse involving clergy went. And so there were lots of questions that these people in Texas had for the Pope because he had analyzed all these cases, and there was prior notice about this particular diocese, and they wanted to bring him in and depose him. And the president said that as a head of state, he is granted automatic immunity, and he did not have to testify, or he did not have to be deposed. Now, this is another travesty for, obviously, the audience and the survivors of sexual abuse, because they want accountability. And if the problem goes all the way up to the top, then they want to hear it from the top, and they're not getting any answers. And if the president is protecting this corporation, then it says something again.
How long has the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith been around?
Oh, it's called the Holy Office within the church. It's been around for hundreds of years. I mean, this is an original essential organization within the church. Pope Ratzinger, then Cardinal Ratzinger, was in charge of this organization since 1982, I believe. So he was the prefect, it's called, and he was the head of this organization. They are the Holy Office. They handle all different principles within the church. This is just, it happens to also be the same place where if there was a claim made, it would run through this office. So that's not all he was handling, but it's it's the place where everything ultimately ended up.
I mean, so as this is probably like a huge office and he was the head of it, he could probably claim, if he was questioned, that, well, I didn't know that went under, I was the superior, and this didn't pass by my radar.
Well, that's like President Bush saying that he didn't know that we were in Iraq or something like that. I mean, it's if there's a huge problem, then the people, even if you're the head of the office, the people that are beneath you have a responsibility to talk to you. And the attorneys that are involved in this case, and Tom Doyle, who was in the church, say that he was actively involved in this. I mean, he is a very thorough pope. He's a very thorough person, apparently. And, you know, Roger Mahoney was the Bishop of Stockton. He had someone beneath him, but everything that happens under his control is his responsibility. And, I mean, people have to accept responsibility for their positions if they want high positions. They say the Vatican requested this. It was a New York Times article that I cited. But he did not have to be deposed because he's the Pope, even though he may have known a lot.
So how does President Bush fit into this?
Well, the president granted the Pope immunity.
The trailer for this movie received an R rating, which prevents it from being shown before any movie besides those which have R or NC-17 ratings. Mm-hmm. Why did the trailer receive this rating?
It actually received a red band, so that basically is a warning sign to people that it might have explicit material. And the way that works is now our trailer will not be played in the mainstream theaters unless the theater owner wants to play it, and that's generally not the case. They generally don't want to play red-banded trailers. The MPAA felt that Oliver talking about children was not appropriate for anything other than an R-rated film as the trailer. So now we are limited to independent theaters, and that's just how it goes. What we found out after this is that of the panel that rates films, 2 of the 10 members are active clergy members. So more troubling than the rating is who is making the decision about what we see in the theaters. Is the church behind that at all?
And you chose not to submit the film to the Motion Picture Association of America for rating, right? Right.
We are going out unrated, and that was a decision made by our distributor, Lionsgate. They are not a signatory, so they don't have to rate the film, and that's just a decision they made independently.
A signatory of the MPAA?
Yes. Apparently you either are or you aren't, and if you're not, then you have the option to release films unrated.
Mm-hmm. Can you tell me about how some of the victims and the victims' families have taken to the making of this movie and their reaction to it?
Yeah. Well, the Giono family, for example, has said that this has helped them to communicate with each other better. This was the elephant in the room until they started making the film. It was Bob Giono would see his daughter walk in the room, and he saw all of his guilt. He saw Oliver O'Grady. He saw everything that happened when she was 5 years old, and he was unable to get over it. So for him, this proved to be something that gave him an opportunity to forgive himself a little bit and to talk to his daughter about something that's so horrific. Others have said similar things. It was very therapeutic for them to go through and talk about this. And they have a lot of anger towards the cardinal, towards the church, who has basically shut the door on them and not offered them an opportunity to talk to them, to get, to have the support of the organization that they put all their faith in. So these people felt that it was a really positive thing. And that's a great thing to hear because, I was with them, watching them expose their deepest, darkest wounds, and it's nice to know that they feel positive about it. They've all come to the screenings and spoken at Q&As and really been supportive of this film.
Despite the treachery and the betrayal that the victims received at the hand of the church, we see a scene where Bob Juno, Anne's father, says, he can't believe in God anymore, and Anne breaks down crying when he says the statement. And then later we see Anne in church praying. How do you suppose that somebody who's been so betrayed by this institution can still keep their faith in the Catholic Church?
Well, in Anne's mind, this isn't the church. This is a man. This is a bad man who hurt her. And the men who knew he was hurting her didn't protect her. But she still believes in the Catholic faith. This isn't everything about the faith, but it's so much more devastating for someone like Anne, who has that much faith in it, than someone like Adam, who kind of didn't really care to begin with. It was just a history lesson for him. So for her, it's a real loss. I mean, she tells me that she goes to different churches on Sundays because she doesn't want to be recognized, and she cries her way through church, but she has to go because it's so important to her. So this is someone who has really lost everything.
What was your goal, your mission statement, if you will, when you went out to make this film?
Well, I think that there were a few things that were really important to me. Number one, it was important for me to show that we were just talking about celibacy and the history of celibacy, that this is something that came from a power decision, a financial decision, and it's ruined so many people's lives. So that's really important. And then the response from the Catholic Church to this whole crisis has been, oh, let's clean up the church. Let's get rid of the homosexuals. And there is no single report linking homosexuality to pedophilia. So when they're trying to scam the public, then that obviously makes a journalist want to get to the bottom of the story. So I interviewed numerous psychologists, and they all said the same thing. There is no single report linking homosexuality and pedophilia. You're talking about sex versus rape. And so I wanted to educate. That's why we use female survivors. It's not just a altar boys and priests thing. It's a children sexual abuse story in the church. They couldn't get to Mahoney. They weren't getting any answers from the bishops' conference in America, which meets twice a year. They wanted to meet with someone and hear an apology and have their story heard. So they went over there, and I think they really did expect to get an answer. As a journalist, I had an opinion. I kind of thought, oh my God, there's no way they're going to meet with them. I mean, come on, they won't talk to me. They're, what? Hopefully they will. It would be great if they could get some answers. But I had tried successively to get interviews with all the different appropriate departments within the church, and I was turned down every step of the way. So I couldn't imagine that they were going to get too far, but they wanted to do this, so we followed them, and it was heartbreaking.
Why did Oliver O'Grady pull his initial offer to meet with the victims?
Because his brother is a famous entertainer in Ireland, and he basically found out that Oliver was working with me. He found out about the documentary, and he lost it. He could not believe that Oliver was going to tell his story and shame the family like that. So he insisted that he never speak to me again.
And did that cut off contact?
Mm-hmm.
He listened?
No. He still talked to me, but he did not agree to be filmed anymore, because we were going to go back and interview him again,
mm-hmm.
because, we wanted to follow the story, and it just ended there. So.
Hopefully this film is going to, open up a lot of doors, and there'll be a lot of, hopefully, more victims coming forward so that we can press charges and finally bring these perpetrators to justice.
Right. It's very important to hold people accountable for decisions that they made. If the head of any other corporation did what Cardinal Roger Mahony did with someone under them, and hundreds and thousands of children were raped under his watchful eye, I don't think he would still be in office.
Deliver Us from Evil is being released in select theaters in New York, Boston, and LA. It is being released by Lionsgate on October 13th. Amy Berg, thank you so much for joining us here in Studio A.